Hi, everyone. So we are pushing through humans versus bacteria in Unit 2, and I'm so sad that we're coming up on the last couple of lessons of my favorite unit of the school year, but that's okay. Hopefully you guys are enjoying it as much as I am. So I just think bacteria are so cool. Well, cooperation and survival, lesson 2, our explore. So our aim says, why is it advantageous for bacteria to cooperate? All right. Now, if I look at the word advantageous, I should see the word advantage, and it's just asking, why is it beneficial for bacteria to cooperate, to work together? So our do now says, have you ever worked in a group? Did everyone contribute equally? What are the benefits and potential costs of working in a group? So for me, my short answer is yes. I have worked in a group, right? But I've also experienced that working in a group, everyone did not contribute equally. Right? And what that led to is that there was an increasing amount of stress on myself and others to complete the parts of the slackers, the students that didn't do anything or contributed nothing. This increased tension and resentment, at least on my end. Resentment between the scholars and the slackers. I know I probably shouldn't be calling them slackers, but that's exactly what they were. The benefit is less work per person equals less stress, right? So that's the benefit. Less work equals less stress. The cons include accommodating slackers, right? Having to kind of put up with their nonsense, right? Not contributing anything, but always have a critique, that type of deal. We've all been there before. All right, so part A, cheating versus collaboration game. So bacteria also collaborate in groups, with some individuals doing the majority of the work, while others may sit back and cheat a little. Get some annotations in here. I'll start again. Bacteria also collaborate in groups, while some individuals doing the majority of the work, or with some individuals doing the majority of the work, while others may sit back and cheat a little by exploiting the work of others. In this investigation, we will explore the conditions under which organisms may cooperate or cheat and the impacts of these different strategies. All right, so the directions say, as you play the game as a class, take note of the strategies used, outcomes, vocabulary terms, and any other items you find important. All right, now, unfortunately, we can't play this game together, but I'm going to drop the link to this game under here, so that way you can write down some observations that you see, some notes that you see. I don't want to spoil it by writing down some observations that I saw, but the game is really, really fun. It's very interesting too. So I definitely encourage you all to play it. Now, part B, data analysis. All right. Right. So this is kind of a continuation of what it is that we're looking at with the game. So let's read. Cystic fibrosis, also known as CF, is a genetic disease in which a thick mucus builds up in the lungs of patients. Pathogenic bacteria often thrive in this mucus, causing frequent infections. Bacteria living in the lungs of CF patients need to acquire iron from their environment, which is the human host, right? So the bacteria that thrive in this cystic fibrosis, in the mucus inside of your lungs, right? They're pathogenic, which means that they cause a lot of infections. But in order for them to survive, they need to somehow be able to acquire enough iron to survive in their environment, which is the human host. Cooperative bacteria living in these patients can generate biofilms. And that's something that we've discussed in the Engage lesson prior to this one. Here, the bacteria produce molecules that help acquire iron, which can be shared amongst the bacteria living in the biofilm. So here we have one type of cooperative behavior, right? The bacteria that are living inside of the mucus, inside of the lungs of these patients, they get to form their own biofilm where they're able to produce molecules that allow them to acquire enough iron to survive, but not just enough to survive, enough to actually share amongst each other in the biofilm, right? So that's going to help the colony to survive and reproduce, which is not what we want inside of our bodies. We don't want these pathogens to form biofilms like stronger together. We don't want that. So for something like a biofilm, you can almost think of ants as a creature, right? One individual ant really is not doing much of anything. We can squash it with our feet, right? Most animals can probably kill it or eat it or something like that. But a colony of millions of ants that come together is almost like a super organism. Organisms will not mess with colonies of ants because they know how violent and aggressive they are and how much damage they can do while together. Okay? Ants are very, very, very social and cooperative creatures, guys. You know what I mean? I've actually seen videos of ants that are able to actually form rafts using their bodies in order to get across bodies of water. They link their bodies together, or they might lock their jaws together in order to form like a raft, and other ants will get on top of that makeshift raft and it'll drift across to another side, right? That's the ultimate cooperative behavior, right? They're literally using their bodies as a mechanism to transport their entire colony, right? So think of a biofilm as doing the same thing. These bacteria individually are okay, but it's useless, it's insignificant. But an entire colony of bacteria living together, oh, you betcha, you betcha. And as the biofilm also stated, plaque is another example of a biofilm. Plaque that occurs like on your teeth, right? So sometimes when people fail to brush their teeth often enough, the bacteria that are able to get sugars and other types of nutrients inside of our mouths from like the food that we eat, they're able to survive and reproduce on the food that's in between our teeth and all of those types of, that's why it's so important for us to floss and to, you know, use mouthwash and to brush our teeth after every meal, right? Because we don't want the bacteria that's inside of our mouth or the potential harmful ones to be able to form plaque. Because once they form plaque, they're going to be able to share those resources and they're going to release their own chemicals that help to break down teeth enamel. That's why plaque is not great. That's why it's important to brush your teeth. Okay, so I know that that was a little bit of like an aside, but I just wanted to like reiterate some ways in which we see a lot of cooperative behaviors in nature. And this is one way inside of the lungs of these cystic fibrosis patients. So let's continue. Mutations may arise in a population of cooperating bacteria that turn the individual into a non-cooperator or cheat that does not produce the beneficial molecule, even though they can still acquire iron from the other cooperative bacteria in their environment, right? So here we see another example of a mutation rearing its ugly head, right? And if we remember, a mutation is just a change in DNA, a random change in DNA, something that we can't necessarily control, right? And sometimes they can have beneficial effects, as we saw with the rock pocket mice, the dark colored mice, right? It initially wasn't beneficial because they were seen against the backdrop of the tan sand and the desert. But then once the environment changed to something that was darker, they were able to camouflage a lot better. So over time, that mutation actually became beneficial. Antibiotic resistance was another mutation that we were able to see, right? Some bacteria have developed antibiotic resistance over time due to a mutation that occurred. So they're not being killed off by these antibiotics anymore, rendering a lot of them useless, right? Which is why we're seeing so many incidents of cholera, so many outbreaks of cholera. We also saw another mutation when we're talking about bacteria in caves, right? Those cave bacteria, some of them had a mutation where they were able to produce their own antibiotic to kill off any competing bacteria with them, okay? But as they have like their own antibiotic, there were other ones that were not getting killed by those antibiotics because they had their own mutations that made them immune and rendered those antibiotics that were being produced by the bacteria that live in the caves useless, right? So mutations really help to add to the gene pool of any population. And in this case, it made 100% of the cooperating bacteria, some of them, it turned them into non-cooperators. They were like, you know what, I'm not making any of these beneficial molecules. I'm gonna just still live amongst here, not make this beneficial molecule, and I'm still gonna take the iron from the ones that are cooperating and that are making it, right? So they're kind of just like the weeds in a garden. They're there, and they're just gonna take all the resources from everything else that's helping to contribute to the overall success of the garden, right? That's why you gotta get the weeds out. They're kind of like the cheaters of plants, okay? All right, so the data represents samples of this bacteria population from a CF patient over time. Analyze the data from the graph and note your observations in the See, Think, Wonder graphic organizer. All right, so if we take a look at this graph that's here, it's a little bit difficult to see, so I'm going to fill in these parts. So this should say 0, this should say 25, 50, and you can write this on your own paper, 75, and 100. Okay, this is where our lines are. And if it's difficult to see the lines, I will darken the lines for us using a dotted line, right? Straight line, we have 100 there, we have 75 there, we have 50 there, and we have 25 there. Okay, so that should hopefully make it a little bit easier for us to see it. Okay, now the light blue represents cooperators, and the dark blue represents non-cooperators. And on our y-axis, we have millions of bacteria. That's what it says there. I know it's difficult to see, so I'm filling it in. So this is by the millions of the bacteria. So the 25 represents 25 million bacteria, right? And the graph is just showing us populations of bacteria in cystic fibrosis patient over time, okay? All right, so let's get some See, Think, Wonders going here. Whoops. So something that I see here is that in the first sample, we had the most amount of cooperators, right? Which is what I'm seeing here. We had the most amount of cooperators in sample one, the first sample. And we had the least amount of cooperator or non-cooperators, right? This is overall a net positive for these bacteria, right? There's more cooperators than non-cooperators, right? But just based off of what I see, the first sample had the most cooperators, and the least cheaters. And in this case, cheaters and non-cooperators, they mean the same thing. All right, so I'll put non-cooperators equals cheaters, right? They mean the same thing. Okay, something else that I see here is that in the fourth sample, we have the opposite of that, right? So the fourth sample had the least cooperators and the most cheaters. And what I'm seeing is that over the course of all of the samples, just over time, in the cystic fibrosis patient, we see that the non-cooperators numbers, those increased, and the cooperators decreased. And anything else that you see there, feel free to go ahead and write that down. What this makes me think is that non-cooperators are benefiting more from resources than cooperators. And the reason why I think that is because if their numbers are increasing, that means that they're getting the resources that they need in order to survive, which means that they're reproducing because their numbers are increasing, okay? Cooperators are suffering, is what it makes me think, as a result of non-cooperators. Just gonna put non-co-op or non-coop, right? And the reason why I think that is because the cooperators numbers are decreasing as a result of those cheaters being there. The non-cooperators are stealing all the resources from the hard work of the cooperators, all right? And write down anything else that it makes you think as well. So far, that's all I have. All right, but definitely feel free to write down anything else that contributes and feel free to share it. So what this makes me wonder is what factors contribute to the success of non-cooperators, right? So what's allowing the success of the non-cooperators to occur to where from the first sample to the fourth sample, it literally has a net gain over time. And then I also wrote, besides mutations, are there other processes that cause cooperators to become non-cooperators? The text mentions that because of mutations, they become non-cooperators. But I do wonder, are there any other processes or any other influences that would allow that to occur as well? Like, can it just happen based on need alone? Is that something that the bacteria can, I don't want to say decide because they don't have brains, but is that something that they can orient themselves to doing based on their actual need? All right. Now, just like any other investigation, conclusion questions are up to you to do on your own. But I will read each question and see if I can try to simplify it in case it needs simplification. Number one, what patterns did you notice in the graph and the simulation? How are these patterns helping you make sense of how and why bacteria may have cooperative behaviors? Right? So what are some patterns that we're seeing both in the graph with the cystic fibrosis patient and also in the simulated game, cooperation versus cheating game, that helps us to make sense of how and why bacteria are even engaging in cooperative behaviors in the first place, right? Because we're still trying to understand and just overall explain why they're cooperating with each other to begin with, why they've evolved that way. Number two, it says explain the costs and benefits of cooperative behavior to the individual as observed in the investigation. So you have two lines that are here. I would probably just make the first one a benefit and then the second one a cost, right? This is called a trade-off, right? Whatever the benefit is, it comes at a cost of some sort. Now, number three says, under what circumstances is cooperative behavior beneficial for a population as observed in the investigation? And under what circumstances is cooperative behavior not beneficial? So just like with the previous question, you can literally write beneficial. You're going to write something that's positive about cooperative behavior. Not beneficial, you're going to write something that's not positive about cooperative behavior. Now, number four says, in a population of bacteria, why do you think non-cooperators or cheaters could appear in a population of cooperators? Where do we see a similar example in the simulation, right? So in any population of bacteria, right? When did non-cooperators come into existence? And where do we see a similar example in that game that we played, cooperation versus cheaters? What happened? You have to play the game in order to know that, right? Number five says, how are cooperative behaviors in humans similar to cooperative behaviors in bacteria, and how are they different, right? So we have a similar, right? Similarity. And then we have something that's different or differences. And then finally, what else do we need to know to better understand the phenomena of bacteria cooperating to generate biofilms, right? So what are some questions that we can still ask that help us to understand this phenomena of bacteria cooperating with each other? All right, what are some questions that we still have? All right. So yes, this is gonna require some brain power, but I know that you guys can absolutely do it. And our next lesson is going to just be a very simple explain lesson with another claim, evidence, reasoning example as well, which you'll also be doing for your performance task on cooperation and survival. All right, and I will see you guys all next time. Bye.